Hey guys! Well, today is St. Patrick's Day, and I thought, what better way to observe St. Patrick's Day and the Sabbath than reading some family history from your ancestor that comes from the Isle of Man and Ireland. Today's chapter is interesting because, again, she goes into her memories and talks about a lot of different random experiences from her past. She talks about the prophet Joseph Smith. Again, she talks about her feelings about polygamy. She talks about people in her family and in her community. She shares some of the things about pioneer life. She touches again on some of those experiences crossing the plains. And then the author, her granddaughter, kind of comes in and out and narrates. So she shares some things that are going on from her perspective, and then it goes right back into Elizabeth talking. So it kind of just goes back and forth. And then some parts read like a journal. So it is a very interesting chapter, but definitely not boring. So let's get reading. Chapter 27. I can tell you, polygamy wasn't all it was cracked up to be. There was one woman, I'll call her Belle. That wasn't her real name. She was a fourth wife to one of the more well-to-do men, very pretty and much younger than he or any of the other three wives. It was understood by the farmers, who all had grain to harvest, to pitch in and help each other. There was only one big threshing machine in the whole place. The wives could cook dinner for the threshers the day they came to that farmer's place. Many of the best grain fields were up north in Weber County. Then the wives would go up there, one at a time, and do the cooking. But when it came Belle's turn, she flatly refused to go. Let them go as want to work. Let them go as want to work like that, but I'm not going to do it. Not ever, she announced. Then she added, "What's one more dish to wash or potato to peel? It's not for me." And she never did go take her turn to fix a single dinner for those threshers. Another time she wanted a chicken when she was cooking for company of her own. It belonged to her sister, who was determined not to part with it. A battle ensued between them, and they actually pulled that live chicken in two. She had some temper, that woman, and when she got mad, she was a devil. Many years later, when the husband got very sick, he went to Belle. It was after the first wife had died, for Belle to nurse and take care of him. "Go to one of the others," she told him. "I've got more than I can do taking care of my children." Taking care of my children. Remember, I mentioned that Mary's husband also had 4 wives. Emmeline Levitt was the first and eldest. She was a very fine woman, so kind and understanding to the other 3 wives. Mary, my best and dearest friend, was third, and had nothing but praise for her. She told me once that when first she married Brother Smith, Emmeline took her into her own home and mothered her. Poor little Mary, just 14 years old when she married. She was the third wife. Millie, who lived just across the street from me, was the second, and Nell, her real name was Eleanor Felshaw, was the fourth. Millie's real name was Maria Cherry. She was the youngest of a large family, all of whom settled in Centerville, even before I did. They almost named the town Cherry Creek for that family. I loved Millie. She was kind to everyone. She dearly loved children. Hers was a rather sad life. She lost 3 of her 6 children in their childhood. It was the custom when the first wife died that the husband would take the second wife in line, if she were living, and marry her legally, thus making her the first in the eyes of the law of the land. But not in this one family where Belle was. When the first wife died, Belle nagged and tormented the husband and gave him no peace till he took her, the 4th in line, and made her the legal wife. Then she demanded a honeymoon as well, and got it. Another time, she got him to borrow $500, a real fortune in those days, from his second wife's estate, her inheritance, actually left to her by her parents. Belle used it to buy new furniture for her own home, After he was dead, and they came to settle up the estate, the second wife stood up and told that he had borrowed the 500 from her estate, that it was an honest debt, and that she'd like it for her own children. Belle replied, "If you want it, then go to him and get it." When our husbands were gone to the other house, we wives that were left alone didn't sit around and mourn. We made our own fun, as I've told you. I subscribed to the New York Ledger and took it for 20 years. There were 5 of us who got together every chance we got and played cards, just for fun, no gambling, and had a cup of tea if we could get it. More often than not, one of us would read the continued story from the ledger, and the others would mend, sew, knit, or embroider. We always kept busy and had a good time as well. They called us the Ring, because they said nobody that was out could get in. We're not all alike. Not any of us is perfect. We won't get more nor less than we deserve. Some folks thought that Brother Whitaker was cross and strict with me, but he wasn't. He said he'd love it if I'd let tea alone, but I could do as I pleased, and he'd even buy it for me when he thought I needed it. I remember when President Joseph F. Smith was alive and lived at the Lion House. He had his elderly aunt living there too. She had to have her cup of coffee every morning. Some of the neighbors smelled it cooking and got the story around that the president of the church had coffee for breakfast. This story reached his ears, and he said, "I don't drink it, but my aunt does, and if she wants it, she can have it, and it's no one's business or concern but hers." Oh, the things I have seen in my life. I saw the Nauvoo temple burn. What a terrible thing that was. All that beautiful work, the terrible sacrifices the saints made to build it, and all gone up in smoke. We all wept, even the little children. I was little then too, but I cried as if my heart would break. I remember taking my father's lunch to him when he worked on it when it was being built, and the prophet holding me on his knee and stroking my hair. I remember his strong, beautiful face, his deep, powerful voice, mellowed with a gentle kindness impossible to describe. Then he was dead, the beautiful temple destroyed. What next? But behind the anguish and despair, there was no thought of giving up among those faithful saints. Just the pain of witnessing the cruel destruction of that sacred structure that tore at our hearts. We all knew that we would go on and endure to the end. Then, when we were crossing the plains, one time we lost 16 horses and a whole herd of cows to the Indians, who stampeded our cattle and stole them. But in most ways, we had fairly good luck in our company, very little sickness. One company, almost all of them died of cholera and had to be buried on the road. They'd dig as deep a grave as possible. Then, when covered, they'd run the wagons over it several times to hide any trace of a grave, so the Indians wouldn't dig up the body for the scalp. Often the Indians were on the warpath. Once along the trail, we found a body mutilated and placed directly in the road. 3 miles farther on, we found another, and then another. But the third man had been cut to pieces. His legs and arms were severed and placed over the trunk of his body. These men had been killed for revenge, explained our captain, Brother Wilkie. He thought the murdered men might be California immigrants. We found another burned-out camp, Gentiles, our captain thought. That was still burning. We had a wonderful captain, 50 wagons and their families. Sometimes we traveled hard with Indians hot on our trail, stampeding our cattle and stealing all they could get of them. At such times, the captain ordered all little children to stay in the wagons so they wouldn't be shot with bows and arrows or stolen. There was one big Indian with his naked back painted jet black and big red hands painted all over it. That time we traveled hard for 5 days, and 4 camps stayed within pistol shot of each other so they could protect each other from Indian attacks. Some of them were 18 people to a wagon, with only 1 tent. I let 2 little girls ride in my place in our wagon while I walked, and oh, how grateful they were. The men were after the 16 horses and cows that were driven into the hills, but they didn't recover any of them. It was too dangerous for them to spread out and be separated. Some wagons would get so badly broken and damaged in the stampede that they could not be mended and had to be left. That's why there were so many people to one wagon. They had to double up the best way they could. They'd divide up the contents and put some in each wagon that could possibly take it for the rest of the journey. When I was kidnapped, the Indians took me to their big campground. Each squaw had her own little campfire and tent. They were cooking jerked buffalo meat. Each squaw had a big sack of it. We had some just like it back at our camp. It was made from a fat young critter. They'd cut it into flat steaks first, then into long strips, and then they'd drive little green stakes into the ground and stretch the meat over the stakes. They'd put red-hot coals under it. The fat would drip down into the coals, and the meat would cook and dry and smoke a little, all at the same time. We actually learned this art from the Indians. One had to watch the cooking process real carefully so it wouldn't cook too much and dry up or scorch. Then it was cooled and put into sacks and used to make soup, or if we couldn't make a fire or stop to cook, we'd chew it as it was. It tasted real good too, especially if one were real hungry. Sometimes they'd make the meat up into milk gravy. This was my favorite dish on the plains. As we traveled, we'd often see beautiful herds of wild buffalo grazing in the distance. Well, that was a long time ago, almost as though it happened in another world. The reason for all these flashbacks is that's the way she told me her story. Much of it came only a short time before my Aunt Mamie came and took her away to her home. She lived just days after that, but she was lucid and alert to the very end. During the last month of her stay with me, she'd often sit in her easy chair and talk quietly to herself, just reliving events as they flashed through her mind. I'd jot down whatever I could glean. They all seemed precious to me. She wanted her work in front of her at all times, even though she couldn't see at all well. I want to work. Don't put it away. I'll rest just a minute, and then I can braid a bit more on this rug, and you can sew it up if I can't. What's wrong with me? What's going to become of me? Maybe I'll lie down for just a minute, then I'll be all right. Oh dear, what's wrong with me? Why am I so tired? So tired. I told her she must hurry and get well for her birthday party that her children were planning for her. Just think, Grandma, you'll be 98 years old. Oh, I wish they wouldn't bother. But then, maybe they like to. I guess they think I'm the only mother they'll ever have. And I guess it's true. What date is it? This is February 15th, 1937, and your birthday is less than a month away, the 7th of March. I'm just a poor old fool. Of course I know that. Here, thread this needle for me. I've been poking holes in the air long enough. As Walt would say, I want to work. I love to work. I can't stand to be idle and to do nothing. Why don't you try reading for a while? I don't want you to work all the time. You're not able anymore. I can't read. It's harder work than sewing. The words are all blurry and they run together on the page. I like to braid. I could do it all day long. I always did love to braid and make something pretty and useful out of the worn clothing. It's kind of hard to sew 'em up, though. But the rest is fun, taking those old things and braiding them into smooth, long ropes for rugs. I used to like to sew them, too. Just can't see to do it well anymore. It's almost like making something useful out of nothing at all. Remember, I said I'd do the sewing. She had another dizzy spell today and would have fallen had I not caught her. I can't sit up. I'm just so tired, she sighed. I'm not sick, but my head aches so. But I'm not sick, mind you. I guess I will lie down for a while. I'm just no good anymore. Don't know what ails me. Maybe I'll be all right. I hope so. I can't help it if I'm sick. I don't want to be sick. Oh, dearie me. I feel so bad. I won't. I mustn't be a bother. Yes, I'll go lie down for a while. Just help me to the bed. If anyone comes to see me, just call me. I want to see who comes. Oh, yes, Grandma. I'll pull you up by the hair, I laughed. You just say, Get up there, old lady, and visit with your company. Oh dear, I wish I was well, she murmured as I tucked her in. You're better than you were yesterday. Yes, I guess I am. You can't expect to get well all in one day. Yes, but you can get mighty sick in a day, let me tell you. When first she began having dizzy spells, I called Dr. Buchanan. He came twice a week to check on her. He marveled at her alert mind and her physical beauty of one so old, and complimented her on it. Why, Mrs. Whittaker, you're a marvel for your age. You really are. You have beautiful clear skin and eyes, and all your faculties. If I'm half as alert as you when I'm 70, I'll be surprised. After he was gone. The silly old dunce, he knows well as I do that I'm just an ugly old witch. But then, some of these doctors think they can soft soap old women like me and get away with it. Guess they just can't help it if they think it helps make us feel better. George was twitting me about making a cup of tea for my headache, and then he turned to Grandma and asked her opinion on whether he'd be held responsible for my misdeeds if he didn't succeed in reforming me. It's my opinion that each tub should stand on its own bottom, she replied. After I'd put her to bed with a warm iron to her feet and another to her back, she whispered, Blessed is the man who invented bed. I wouldn't mind being sick if only it didn't hurt so bad. Because you're so nice to me, I can't help enjoying being waited on and petted in spite of myself. You're so good. Me. As she drifted off into dreamland. Next morning. It must be real cold outside. I felt chilly even in bed this morning. I don't see how you can feel cold with a feather tick under you and 2 warm flat irons in bed with you. Perhaps you just imagined it. Well, maybe I did, but it hurt just as bad as if it were so anyway. Going back to my notes of December 23rd, 1936, I have written, Today, the Relief Society sisters brought Grandma a pretty little box of goodies as a season's greeting. As luck would have it, she had just dolled up, put on a new dress, and looked real pert. She has been feeling blue and downcast all day. After they had gone, she said, My, I'm glad I cleaned up and put on a decent dress. I surely looked a sight before. Funny thing, too. I sat there feeling so lazy. I thought, I can't change this dress or move from this chair no matter what. Then I said to myself, Look here, old lady. You get up and march in there and wash your face and clean up, you old fool, you. What ails you anyway? I'd no sooner got fixed up than here they came with that nice box. It's nice to know you're not forgotten, I do declare. Dr. Buchanan came again today. He again complimented her on how well she looked for her age. She is ill with bronchitis. He showed me how to put a chair upside down with the back toward her and a pillow against it to keep her comfortable, yet in a sitting position at all times. You must keep her this way. Don't let her lie flat, or she will fill up with what we call old folks' pneumonia. She was an excellent patient. I followed his instructions carefully, and she cooperated in every way. I eased her position often and rubbed her back frequently. She loved that, and oh, I loved her so much. People who knew us both sometimes remarked that I looked a great deal like her, yet I knew she was far more beautiful than I, in mind and in body, but I took it as a compliment. Next time the doctor came, You're looking much better today. I'm too old for you to patch up, doctor, and you know it. Now, Mrs. Whittaker, if I'd said that, you would have been real mad at me, and you know it. Maybe I would, but it's true just the same. Next morning, she was able to come to the table to breakfast. During the meal, she had a spell of coughing, and she pressed her napkin to her lips and choked. Still gasping for breath while I have a fit. Regal, my youngest, was home with a bad cold, and I had him on the couch in the front room. He was about 5. Grandma came into the kitchen where I was washing dishes and sat by the big coal stove. Range, it was called. Thought I'd come in here and warm my feet in the oven. Opening the oven door and easing her feet gently into the huge opening. Away from the little one, because he needs all the fresh air he can get. I don't want to breathe up his air. Too many folks in the room when one is sick just isn't good for the patient. They breathe up the fresh air the patient needs. My husband George came in a few minutes later, and she mistook him for my father. Then, realizing her mistake, she said, "Oh, I thought you was Reg." "How could you mistake me for so young a man?" he laughed. "Go on with you. You're finishing with minnows to catch a mackerel." I can see she is failing a little every day, despite all my efforts. She caught a very bad cold a few days later when she attended Bill Dalton's funeral. He was a pal to her son Will, and her own very dear friend. Her cough is no better. She has been sleeping and dozing in her chair most of the day. She hates to rest in bed. It makes the nights so long. I hate to see Bill go. He's just a few years younger than I, and he never married, you know. Will really loved that man. Well, guess they're together now. After I'd bathed and put the 3 boys to bed, I said, "Come, Grandma, it's your turn now." When I got her bathed and tucked into bed, she looked up at me. "Now the last of your babies is tucked in. Maybe you can have a little rest. Oh, bed feels so good. I'm tired. Guess I can sleep all right." In the middle of the night, recently, she got up and dressed herself. 12:30 a.m. I had a hard time convincing her that it wasn't morning and time to get up, but did finally. Her appetite is failing some too, I've noticed. A few days later, Mariah Dalton, they called her Rye. She's the elder sister of Bill, who died recently. She had never married either, was a very dear and close friend of Grandma's, came to visit Grandma. I left them to enjoy each other's company while I worked in the kitchen. Only snatches of their conversation reached me. "Grandma, I guess I'll never die. Nothing can kill me. I've outlived all my oldest friends but you, Rye. And poor dear Mary Smith, oldest and first friend I ever had since moving to Centerville. Bless her heart. Mary's a worrier. She's died 1,000 deaths already, mostly for those she loves. She was dying for someone almost every day. Once she saw a load of hay tip over, and her son Frank was standing by it, and she screamed, 'Frank's killed! Frank's killed!' I shook her and told her to use her eyes. Frank was standing in plain sight. But she nearly had hysterics. Well, I guess anyone can have hysterics. Sometimes it takes a smart person not to have them. Ah, but Mary is smart. She's just very nervous and high-strung." Rye, "Well, it's a good thing we're not all alike. Everybody's different." After her friend had gone, she was trying to look at all the headlines of the paper. "My glasses help some, quite a little. They make a fly look big again. But I can't read. Words are all blurred together. Print's too fine, I guess." Another bad coughing spell. Oh, I wonder if I'll ever get through barking. It's cough, cough, bark, bark. I'll cough and then I'll die. Oh, dear me, dear me. I've nursed sick people and done women's work all my life. I can remember back in the Isle of Man when my mother would have those dreadful sick headaches. I'd have to take care of her even then, and later when we got to the States. I was just past 7, and I'd stand on a chair to wash dishes and mix bread. Yes, and do all the housework, even then. Even made biscuits from the time I was 6 years old. I'd have to scour the knives and forks after every meal. They were pewter, you know. We wore them out scouring them, trying to keep them clean and bright. Same with our floors and woodwork. We gathered river sand, washed it, and scoured our floors with it, and the chairs, until the nails stood up in the round humps on the floors where we'd scrubbed and worn the wood away. Poor old Sister Cherry cried when her girls insisted on giving their whole house a good coat of paint. "You can't cover up my polished clean boards. I won't let you," she sobbed. "With that old greasy paint? Who ever heard of such a thing?" Yes, and let me tell you, more than the wood was worn out with that dreadful scouring and scrubbing. We could get no scrubbing brushes in those days, and soap was 25 cents a bar for the cheapest brand of laundry soap. So we used our hands. Skin and all often came off. We'd cramp up our legs and back with plenty of water, and on hands and knees we'd scatter the sand in one spot and scrub it with our bare hands, then wash it up with a rag. And that's it for today's reading. So I just wanted to give you an update on the gravesite memorial. Initially, I had reached out to different monument companies and realizing that the most inexpensive, simple, flat headstone of the smallest size was anywhere from $500 to $700. I decided to look into other options. So I went online and I found some online monument companies where you could get the same single granite flat headstone in the smallest size for just $200. So I thought that was the way to go. When I contacted the cemeteries to get the process going, that's when I learned that I have to have a monument company install the headstone. It's written into the city ordinances. So a monument company has to come install it. They have to put a border of cement around it. There's also some fees that you have to pay the city as they have someone come and mark the area where the headstone is supposed to go. And it turns out they won't let anyone other than a monument company pour the cement and lay that monument. Now, my dad has done construction his whole life. He used to have his own company. He's worked in concrete and cement for many years, and he said he would happily lay the headstone for me. However, the cemetery said no. So, they need to have an actual monument company, especially where the business is licensed and insured and knows the process. That's what they want, and that's just how it is. So the other obstacle I ran into was I started reaching out to the monument companies to see if they would lay the headstone for me. And just about every place I called told me that they do not install headstones that were not ordered through them. Now remember, their cheapest headstones are anywhere from $500 to $700. So in an ideal situation, I would order a headstone online for $199 and then have my dad install it, and we'd be good. But that's not allowed. So I am still trying to figure this one out, you guys. So if you wouldn't mind keeping me in your prayers and this situation in your prayers, I realize that I probably most likely will just have to order a headstone through a monument company. So you pay for the monument and then you pay for the services to have them bring the headstone to the cemetery, which is usually around $700. So on average, the most inexpensive package would be over $1,000 to install one single flat, basic, simple, small granite headstone. In the meantime, I reached out to the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers and the Sons of the Utah Pioneers to see if there's any maybe grant options or donations that they might be able to provide me with to help with this memorial. So we'll see. I'm not sure. I'm determined to make it happen, but $1,000 is a lot of money. So I'm trying to get creative. I was talking to a lady on the phone about it. She said, that's why I still don't have a headstone for my baby. She said, I had a baby pass away and that baby still has no headstone because it's over $1,000. It's very expensive to be buried. There's also about a 5 to 6 week waiting list to have a monument installed because this is their busy season with Memorial Day coming up. So either way, it's going to happen, and I want that to be in the documentary. So maybe we'll have to have a part 1 and a part 2. We'll figure it out. Keep me in your prayers and stay tuned. And I'll see you next week for chapter 28.